do plan to call his former number two on the campaign, Rick Gates, to the stand. The government's star witness who took a plea deal was a protege of Manafort's and worked with him for more than a decade. The prosecution has focused on how they say Manafort illegally funded his extravagant lifestyle, which includes nearly $500,000 on landscaping. We have this story covered from all angles, but let's begin with CNN's Jessica Schneider outside federal court in Virginia. And Jessica, apparently Manafort had a real affinity for karaoke.
Yeah, Jake, a $10,000 affinity. That's how much he spent on a karaoke system for his Hamptons home. And really, that wasn't all. Prosecutors have brought up vendors and retailers to document just how much Paul Manafort spent. Prosecutors are going to great lengths to prove Paul Manafort lived a life of extravagant luxury. They've submitted reams of receipts documenting the hundreds of thousands of dollars he spent on high-end suits and clothing. In April 2012, Manafort paid $18,500 for a python jacket. Just a few months earlier, it was $9,500 on an ostrich vest. To apparently complement the ostrich jacket, he later paid $15,000 for. There are also photos of the jackets and suits he paid a pretty penny for, including from the store that bills itself the most expensive in the world, Bijan. One blue jacket from Bijan rang in at $32,800. Prosecutors have been parading vendors to the stand to testify to Paul Manafort's penchant for posh living, all to show jurors just how he spent the millions of dollars he allegedly hid in offshore accounts. It wasn't just clothing. Manafort kept his 7 homes from the Hamptons to Manhattan to Virginia in pristine condition. His landscaper testified that Manafort spent about $450,000 over 5 years for his Hamptons home, commissioning him to care for the hundreds of flowers, plus one of the biggest personal ponds in the glamorous locale 2 hours east of New York City. And he kept his Hamptons home high-tech. Manafort paid more than $2.2 million over the course of several years to install Apple TVs, wireless networks, and other electronics. Manafort paid via wire transfer from various offshore bank accounts, even splurging $10,000 on a karaoke system in 2010. And Paul Manafort's personal bookkeeper has been on the stand all afternoon. She says despite the fact that Manafort once made millions, she says by 2016 he was flat out broke, that he had maxed out all of his credit lines. And she said on the stand that led Paul Manafort and his business associate at the time, Rick Gates, to send fake inflated invoices, business statements to banks in order to get loans. And of course, Jake, that goes to the heart of prosecutors' argument here for bank fraud. Jake?
All right, interesting. Jessica Schneider, thanks so much. Let's bring in Evan Perez now. Evan, you've been in court all day. Prosecutors today honed in on how Manafort allegedly moved money around. Tell us about that.
That's right, Jake. Once Paul Manafort was broke, prosecutors say that one of the things that he was starting to do was move money from some of these offshore bank accounts back to the United States, again, evading any reporting of this to the IRS. And in some ways, what he was doing was making these fake invoices to some of the vendors, to his bookkeeper, trying to account for some of this money that he was moving from overseas into the United States. And then he started taking out loans on some of the properties that he had bought, and even going so far as producing doctored receipts and invoices to try to show where this money was coming from. So one of the things that the emerging theme we're seeing from prosecutors today is to try to show that Paul Manafort was not only lying to the IRS, but lying to some of the vendors and his bookkeepers as well. This is all building towards the big witness, which is Rick Gates. We expect that the prosecutors are going to try to show that Rick Gates can testify that he was in on the conspiracy. He helped doctor some of these invoices. And of course, we know that Paul Manafort's team, his lawyers, are going to point out that Rick Gates has admitted to lying to the government, Jake.
All right, Evan Perez, thank you so much. I want to bring back former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner. And Glenn, the prosecution, they're certainly establishing that Paul Manafort lives a very opulent and lavish lifestyle. But certainly there's more to it than that they're trying to establish with the jury.
Yeah, one of the challenges for prosecutors in document-intensive cases is, frankly, to keep the jurors engaged and awake because they can be rather dry. So they need to inject a little bit of excitement where they can. And, you know, this is a case where opulence meets arrogance, and it's all kind of steeped in Paul Manafort's criminality. So what they want to do is bring to the jurors' attention from time to time his 7 homes, his waterfall ponds, his personal putting greens at his house, his ostrich jacket, his cobra jacket. Fortunately, he didn't have, panda boots.
Just for the record, it was a python jacket, not a cobra jacket.
I stand corrected. I hear they're quite nice. But they really do need to keep the jurors engaged. And we see Judge Ellis has begun to sort of rein the prosecutors in, cut a little bit of that back, because in all fairness, you don't want to overly appeal to the emotions of the jurors. So Judge Ellis always keeps his eye on what I would call the appellate ball, making sure that if the prosecution wins a conviction, that they've done it fairly and by the rules, and they haven't sort of overplayed the opulent's hand.
And quickly, if you could, do you expect Manafort will testify in his own defense?
I think the chances are slim to none. Manafort has apparently done so much wrong in his life that cross-examining him would be a prosecutor's dream. I think what's going to be really interesting is if Gates takes the stand, because then we may all learn some things that we have not heard before. We're obliged as prosecutors to turn over all of Gates' statements so that the defense can cross-examine him with everything he's told the government, including things that aren't necessarily directly relevant to this prosecution. So we could all begin to learn a little bit more about what's behind the curtain of the Mueller investigation if they do call Gates to the stand.
Even though the judge has said he doesn't want anything related to politics in this case, and that and the prosecution has said that they're not bringing up anything having to do with Russia.
He said they can't talk about Russia, but the judge can't curtail the defense attorney's right to cross-examine Gates on everything. So Gates only pled guilty to 2 charges, 2 5-year charges. And I would bet my bottom dollar he could have been charged with a whole lot of other crimes. Every one of those crimes that he was not charged with is a benefit that the government gave him. So the defense has broad leeway when they're cross-examining him, searching for bias.